Welcome to the Nature of Teaching Professional Development webinar series. My name is Rod Williams. I'm a professor and extension specialist here at Purdue University. Today's webinar is entitled Environmental Effects of Food Waste. This will be a 30-minute webinar covering numerous aspects of food waste and how it affects our wildlife, our water, and the environment. Now, if you're unfamiliar with food waste, this webinar is going to provide you with science-based background information to prepare you for all remaining webinars associated with food waste. So joining me today is a very good friend of mine and colleague, Rebecca Koetz. Rebecca is an urban ag extension educator with Purdue, but more importantly, she's a co-author on all of the education materials that are associated with food waste. She is without a doubt our resident expert on this subject. So Becca's going to be highlighting key concepts and challenges associated with food waste, and then I'll come back online and finish the webinar by highlighting additional resources, as well as the procedure to obtain your certification of completion. So Becca, at this point, I'm simply going to turn things over to you and let you educate all of us on the concept of food waste and how it's impacting our natural resources.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rod. A lot of you might be a little confused about how food waste is connected with nature and how it is brought into the nature of teaching, but just like Rod mentioned, food waste impacts our natural resources and the environment in a lot of different ways, and I'm excited to share that information with all of you. So I like to think about the problem of food waste in terms of an iceberg, and this infographic from the Food and Agriculture Organization shows that visually. A lot of the things that people do notice typically about food waste is the economic costs and how costly food waste is to us. The money that we're wasting by literally throwing away our food. But what we don't always notice are these environmental and natural resources issues that we don't see so much. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But first, let's get a visual of just how much food is wasted in the US. 30 to 40% of all food that is grown in the US is ultimately wasted, and most of that is wasted by consumers. The amount of food that consumers waste is enough to fill Lucas Oil Stadium, where the Indianapolis Colts play, every day for a year, or 44 Sears or Ellis Towers, just to provide a visual. And when we think about schools, where a lot of you work, US schools spend over $1 billion on food that they're throwing away every year. And food waste is the largest component of the school waste stream. This figure on the right shows the different categories of food wasted over, I believe it was 6 weeks for 10 different schools in Indiana. And the largest category of food waste is unopened and recoverable food. So things like prepackaged snacks, yogurts, cheeses, things like that definitely could have been donated or used other ways. And food waste is very costly. The US spends $165 billion on food that we are ultimately throwing away, which is equivalent to the cost of over 300,000 trips to the moon and back. And the average US family spends about $2,200 per year on food that they're throwing away. And I'm sure all of us can think of much better ways to spend that money. I'll go into details about how food waste is ultimately a consumer-driven issue. Some studies show that we need to double our agricultural production to keep up with our growing population by 2050. But other studies show that we can feed all of the hungry people in our country with the food that we're throwing away. And not to say the food that is trash or the food that is poor quality. I'm talking about food that is high quality and still very much edible. And when we think about how much resources go into producing our food, we use 80% of our fresh water, 40% of our land, and 10% of our energy in the US to produce our food. So agriculture is a very resource-intensive production. Now I'd like to talk about the resources used and affected along all the different steps of the food production system. Just at the production level, where food is grown or made, we use 126,000 million gallons of water per day for things like irrigation and watering our livestock. We also consume soil, human labor, and energy. And resources are affected by agricultural production as well. We have things like runoff from farm fields that affect our water quality. We also introduce things like heavy metals from fertilizers and pesticides into our soil. We have erosion from farm fields, and loss of wetlands and biodiversity. And that's not to say that agricultural production is bad. Of course, we need agriculture to grow our food because we need to eat. But as consumers, when we are telling our retailers that we need more food than we actually do need, so we're purchasing more food than we can actually consume, those retailers are then telling producers to grow more food and put more natural habitats into agricultural production than we actually need to. Then when we get to processing and packaging, we consume a lot of water and we pollute a lot of water. We also expend a lot of human labor and energy and use a lot of land for factories. So these figures for cheese processing and coffee processing are just some examples of how we use a lot of water and other resources to process and package our food. When we think about where our food comes from, a lot of times it's coming from pretty far away. It might be coming from overseas, or maybe we get a lot of our produce from places like California or Florida. They're not always coming from nearby, unless you're participating in the local food system. And that transportation is very costly to the environment. We use about 3/4 of a gallon of water just to produce 1 mile's worth of fuel. And the individual diet uses about 2,500 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year, or produces about 2,500 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. So that's a lot of different emissions coming from transportation of our food. Then when we get to the disposal process, we affect the environment in different ways as well. So once food waste ends up in landfills, we're using hundreds of thousands of acres of land to put into just disposal. And in the US, we have over 2,000 active landfills alone. This figure shows the tons of trash in landfills contributed per person in each state. If we look at Indiana, for example, we see that each person contributes about 32.3 tons of trash every year. That's a lot of trash. And this figure shows the numbers of landfills across the US from the early 1900s to present day. The red dots are open landfills and the green dots are closed landfills. In the landfills, even once they're closed, they might be built on for things like parks or just covered up to make them look a little prettier, but ultimately that land is not able to be put back into agricultural production and really not useful in the long run. So that land is effectively out of commission. Now I'd like to talk about how food waste affects the environment once it's thrown away. But first we have to look at a modern landfill and what that looks like. So a modern landfill is effectively a large hole in the ground that we put trash in. But before we put the trash in, we have a protective clay and plastic liner at the bottom of the landfill that protects our groundwater from things like landfill leachate, which is the liquid that comes from the trash in the landfill. We also have a leachate treatment system typically on site or off site, and a leachate collection system to catch that leachate and take it to the treatment site. We also typically have a methane gas recovery system, and we typically cover our landfills with a clay cap to keep it from emitting as many odors and to reduce wildlife scavenging. I mentioned that we often have a leachate collection system in the modern landfills, but what exactly is leachate? So leachate is that liquid that comes from the water content in the trash in the landfill. It can also be contributed by things like rain. But if you think about food waste compared to other kinds of trash in the landfill has a lot higher water content. So if you think of like a mushy, rotten piece of fruit compared to a candy wrapper or some styrofoam, that food waste has a lot higher water content and will contribute a lot more to leachate in the landfill. And those plastic liners at the bottom of the landfill aren't perfect. A lot of times they will degrade over time and let just a small amount of leachate into the groundwater system. So once that leachate goes into the groundwater, it can reach out to other parts of the watershed, into different water bodies where aquatic organisms live. And I did mention that we have leachate collection systems, which then take the leachate to be treated on-site or off-site, but that's not perfect as well either. If a landfill has a treatment site, they're able to treat that leachate. But if they don't, they have to transport that leachate to somewhere off-site to be treated before being released back into the water system. But if the landfill can't afford to do that, sometimes they just end up releasing the leachate back into the water system. And that leachate is full of pollutants and also nutrients. So things like nitrogen and phosphorus that would be great on a lawn or a garden maybe for things to make things grow. But once it ends up in water bodies, it can contribute to algal blooms. It can cause algae to grow. And that algae can block out sunlight from reaching the aquatic plants, and then the aquatic plants die, and that can lead to less oxygen being produced in the water, and then the aquatic organisms like fish die. So that's the eutrophication process. And even if the leachate is treated, a lot of times municipalities don't have limits on the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen that can be released into the water system. So for example, if you see this table at the bottom, Indiana has only 44% of municipalities that have requirements for the amount of phosphorus that can be released back into the water system, and none of them have requirements for nitrogen. I also mentioned that we typically have methane gas recovery systems in the modern landfill. And when we cover our landfills with a clay cap to reduce odors and to reduce wildlife scavenging, that creates an anaerobic environment without oxygen. So then the only microorganisms that can survive in the landfill to break down the organic material are microorganisms that don't need oxygen to survive. And so those microorganisms produce methane as their waste instead of carbon dioxide. And that methane gas is actually 21 times worse for climate change than CO2. If you look at these two pictures, the one on the left of a forest and the one on the right of a farm field, which do you think has more biodiversity? Definitely the one on the left, because we have more diversity of different kinds of plants and other habitat features that wildlife need to survive. Some wildlife can definitely survive in farm fields, but they don't have the variety of resources available to them as a natural landscape. So the more food waste we make, the more food we are, as consumers, are purchasing that we don't need. And so we're telling retailers that they need to purchase more food from agricultural production, and then more land is taken from natural habitats and put into production and also put into landfill disposal, because we need places to dispose of all of that extra food waste. Wildlife is affected by food waste in other ways as well. Food waste in a landfill is effectively a buffet for wildlife. So wildlife are drawn in larger populations closer to human populations, causing them to become nuisance species. And wildlife are also drawn in larger densities than they would normally and naturally. So then disease is more easily spread between wildlife species and between wildlife. They're also more likely to consume trash accidentally, and they're more likely to overconsume their natural prey and outcompete other members in their food chain. So now I'd like to talk about what we can do to help with this issue. So as educators, you can help teach your students about food waste and how it affects the environment and our natural resources. I'd like to talk about some of the resources that the Nature of Teaching has available. So this one unit of lesson plans is designed for K through second grade students. It's called What a Waste of Food, and it has 3 lesson plans. These 3 lesson plans help teach students how to identify how, where, and why food is wasted, helps them describe how their eating habits can affect their food waste problem, accurately interpret expiration and best by dates, describe proper storage methods for various foods, propose various techniques for using older foods and food byproducts, and using all fun hands-on games and activities. This next unit of 3 different lesson plans is designed primarily for 3rd through 5th grade students. And these lessons help students understand that natural resources are limited and describe the amount of food wasted and resources used throughout the food production process. The activities in this lesson plan help students walk through the story of the life of an apple from when it's produced in an orchard to the consumer. And another activity in the lesson plan has students role play and act as producers and consumers, learning how resources are used to produce their food. This unit of 3 lesson plans, Food Waste and the Environment, helps students explain the ways that food waste affects water quality, describe the relationship between food waste and climate change, and list ways that food waste affects wildlife. It's designed primarily for 3rd through 5th grade and some junior high audiences. These lesson plans have activities that include having students build a mini landfill and see how leachate seeps through those protective clay and plastic liners. Students will also play active games that they can play outside or in a gymnasium to see the relationships between wildlife and food waste in a landfill, and the relationships between methane gas and food waste in a landfill. This unit of 2 lesson plans, Food Waste Solutions, helps students describe the reasons for food waste at school and home, describe examples of food waste solutions at school and home, and helps students conduct a food waste audit using EPA toolkit resources. Some other resources that are available on the Nature of Teaching include an upcoming lesson plan that's not available yet, but it's called Transporting Food Waste, and it will be designed primarily for 2nd through 5th grade students and help students understand the local food system and how transporting food from far away is connected to carbon dioxide emissions and environmental costs of food waste transportation. We also have several videos available and related links that we recommend for further exploring the concepts of food waste and natural resources. Now I'd like to turn things over to Rod.
Great, thank you, Becca. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us on the Nature of Teaching Professional Development webinar series entitled Environmental Effects of Food Waste. I certainly hope you consider participating in the remaining webinars associated with food waste to find out how to incorporate many of the lessons that Becca just shared with you into your classroom. Now, if you enjoyed this webinar, I encourage you to click on some additional resources that we have for you. You can click on the card that should now be appearing in the top right of your screen to visit our Nature of Teaching YouTube channel. Now, if you're having a difficult time with accessing that card, I've also placed the URL of our YouTube channel in the PowerPoint for you. Or if you're in YouTube, you can simply search for Nature of Teaching in the YouTube search bar. So once you click on this card, you can view sneak peeks of lesson plans that are directly related to the webinar you just completed. So these sneak peeks are really just 2 minutes or less, and they really highlight many of the fun activities that we have in each of our lessons for you. So it's a great way for you to go watch these sneak peeks and determine whether or not you might want to incorporate that lesson plan into your classroom. Now, if you're interested in obtaining a certificate of completion for this 30-minute webinar, there should be a card appearing in the top right of your screen at this point. And now if you click on that card, you'll be directed to a short Qualtrics survey that provides us some feedback on the webinar. Once you complete that short Qualtrics survey, you'll be automatically emailed your certificate of completion that you see here. Again, if you're having a difficult time with the card, I've placed a URL for that Qualtrics survey as well. So at this point, Becca, if you'd like to join us again as we wrap up the webinar today, I just simply wanted to thank you, Becca, for sharing your knowledge and expertise on food waste with us today. And I was wondering if viewers have additional questions around food waste and the environment, is it possible for them to reach out to you?
Definitely, I'd be happy to help.
And so if you have questions regarding food waste, I encourage you to email Becca at the email listed below. If you have questions for me regarding the procedure, how to access the sneak peeks, or questions about the certification of completion, you can certainly email me at the email list below as well. So at this point, Becca and I really hope that you've enjoyed learning with us. Consider participating in additional professional development webinars offered by our entire Nature of Teaching team. But until then, we want to thank you for engaging our youth with nature. So until next time.